From the beginning of the film, a thematic implication is made that is separate from the basic plot. The notion that the souls of the dead are somehow offended by the living and are coming back to punish them. A small detail, possibly accidental, is the ruined condition of the cemetery sign at the beginning. In the comedy commentary on the DVD, it's suggested that this sign has been blasted with shotguns, and yeah, funnily enough, I thought that too when I saw it. Or is this mud? Why has no one even repaired this sign? Are they happy to let the sign become so unreadable that some visitors might not even find the cemetery in future? It's very conspicuous because we'd expect that the filmmakers would ensure this sign is fully readable. Johnny's dialogue in the first character scene consists almost exclusively of insults to the dead, including his own father.
Look at this thing. We still remember. I don't. I don't even remember what the man looks like.
He carries on the insults at the grave itself, and as he does so, the rumble of thunder kicks in, like his dad is rolling in his grave in response to the insult.
Yeah, a little spit and polish. You can clean this up. Sell it next year. Wonder how many times we bought the same one. Hey, come on, Barb. Church was this morning, huh?
As Johnny starts tormenting Barbara that the dead are going to rise from their graves to get her, he sees and mocks a single roaming zombie who just happens to be a guy about the right age to be their father. I'm not saying he's literally their father, but the suggestion is there. This is supported by the fact that writer-director George A. Romero directed the mega-classic horror anthology movie Creepshow 14 years later, and in that movie the very first story involves a dead father returning from the grave after being insulted by his daughter who had killed him during an argument. Zombie Dad then goes on to kill other family members who were after his inheritance money. Back to Night of the Living Dead, Johnny tells of grandfather damning him to hell when he disrespected the dead as a child.
I jumped out at you from behind the tree, and Grandpa got all excited, and he shook his fist at me, and he said, "Boy, you'll be damned to hell."
As the father symbolizing zombie attacks, we get thunder and lightning, which is missing from the rest of the zombie appearances later. Despite the thunder and lightning, it doesn't even rain. So it's like there's special psychological relevance with this particular zombie. The motive of zombies to eat the living seems to be sidelined here too. This zombie could just eat Johnny, but instead he chases Barbara like he has some sort of vendetta against her. But there is a contradiction in most zombie movies anyway, and that they don't try to eat each other. It's as if they know intellectually who's alive and who isn't. So there's always been a weird kind of revenge against the living element with zombies in these movies. This father-like zombie torments and chases Barbara for quite a long sequence, but then he disappears for most of the story. Ben kills several zombies in the yard, but for some reason Daddy Zombie isn't there, he's disappeared. Several scenes later, there's what I suspect to be a sneaky visual reference to the haunting father figure theme. Barbara enters one of the rooms in the house, and there's a photo of an older man on the fireplace next to what looks like an urn for holding dead relatives' ashes. Attention has been paid to props here because the clock says that it's 10 to midnight, and later the group await a broadcast due at 3 a.m. And in another overlap with Romero's movie Creepshow, a portrait of father above a fireplace is used, and this time with more prominence. Jumping way ahead to the ending zombie attack in which most of the characters die, Dad Zombie is briefly seen again, and it is clearly him in at least 2 shots. And he seems to be leading the effort to get to Barbara specifically, like he's back to haunt her. But then Father Zombie suddenly disappears, and the zombie version of her brother Johnny appears in his place. We can tell it's him because of the driving gloves that he used earlier, and it's he who drags her out to be eaten alive. So Johnny's original tauntings come true.
They're coming to get you, Barbara. They're coming for you, Barbara.
This subtext about Barbara's childhood fear of the living dead is separate from the main plotline in which the zombies are the result of radiation brought back to Earth by a Venus probe. But the radiation I consider to be a convenient justification to give the zombies a sense of narrative credibility, a cover for what the film is really about in psychological terms. The sequels to this film, which were also written and directed by George A. Romero, seem to have dispensed with the radiation origin plot point. So for now we have a kind of anger of the dead subtext, like these monsters want to punish the living for some reason. And so far the disrespect of the dead by the living, by Barbara's brother Johnny in particular, this is the most observable motive. 3 times in the Night of the Living Dead script, zombie behaviour is described using the word animal, while in the film, at one point the radio newscaster says the enemy, quote, look like people but act like animals, end quote.
Monsters, people who look like they're in a trance, and things that look like people but act like animals. Some I would...
These animal references I'd be willing to wave off as nothing, but there is something else that carries stronger implication of meaning, and that is the animal heads and furs decorating one of the rooms. Far from being incidental, check out the big dramatic emphasis. Later on she enters this room again and one camera shot pans from the big teeth of a boar down to Barbara. This all makes sense in that predatory animals kill their prey by biting and then eating them, and zombies pretty much do the same. We could just think of it as a subliminal foreshadowing inference regarding the eating of flesh, which doesn't occur until later in the film. And I found it funny that a pig head with fangs hovers over Tom in this scene when he's preparing for the mission that will see he and his girlfriend killed. And we have the overlap with metaphors in Romero's movie Creepshow, the conflict between a woman and her father who will later become a zombie. This is intercut with shots of stuffed animals. So these nasty animals might represent the horrible nature of the father. It's interesting that in some horror stories, zombies are the product of witchcraft associated to cannibalistic tribes. In fact, if I remember rightly, that was kind of the common zombie narrative drive in early zombie movies before Night of the Living Dead. And we do tend to describe cannibalistic tribes as acting like animals. And to that effect, I find it interesting that when the zombies are seen eating the dead in this film, the music becomes a trance-like electronic drum sound, almost tribal. In the follow-up movie Dawn of the Dead, the black character talks about his grandfather's belief in voodoo, and his claim that when there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. So it's certainly possible that there's a very, very subtle, tribalistic, cannibalistic voodoo undertone in the original Night of the Living Dead. Something else that seems to link in with this animalistic tribe theme is that as the story goes on, we start to see instances of zombies who have less clothes on, or are wearing night clothes that normally aren't worn in public. And in this instance, completely naked. Note that the woman is young and in decent shape. So was this just cynical exploitation by the filmmakers, a zombie you'd want to fuck, or is it part of an animalistic theme? After all, clothes are unique to human civilization. What other creatures on Earth wear clothes? I can't think of any. Oh, by the way, something else that links into nature itself is the sound of crickets, which is heard as an ambient backdrop in multiple scenes. They're even mentioned in the script a couple of times. It's quite common in horror movies to use the sound of crickets and other nighttime creatures to imply threats lurking in the dark, so nothing original there, but it's something. After the night is over and everyone is dead except Ben, who will soon die too, the sound of crickets is replaced with the chirping of birds. I'm not sure if that represents the zombies being happy that they've had their fill of flesh, or if it's a deliberately false allusion to a happy ending that isn't actually going to happen. There's always been a mysterious aspect to the motivation of flesh-eating zombies in movies. Why do they feel the need to eat? Why only eat the living and not each other? How do they tell the difference? What do they do after they've ate and they're full? Can they even digest food given that they're dead? I don't think I've ever seen a zombie take a crap in a movie either. The fact that they are hardly ever full skeleton zombies suggests that they cannot exist without a good deal of flesh on their bones, which suggests that their body is partially alive in some way. And in Day of the Dead, that idea was pushed with an effort to make it sound scientifically credible. Zombies simply don't make sense biologically, but they do represent something, or possibly many things. And one of the things I believe they represent is the mindless food craving of wild animals that forms part of our own evolutionary history. Make a civilized man starve and he will behave like an animal to survive, even becoming a cannibal if that's what it takes.